Dressed in a black regal dress, Sharon pursed her bloodless lips and tilted her head to look at Marek, nodding slightly. Marek clasped his hands and said while concealing some of his madness, "You know about the prisoner pathway, don't you?" "Yes, I've heard of it in the Beyonder circles," Klein answered frankly. "Of course, these Beyonder circles refer to the Nitalks and the Tarot Club," he sighed in his heart as he added. Marek seemed to recall something, and he was silent for nearly 20 seconds. Outside the window, he could hear the rhythmic sound of the carriage wheels rolling across the concrete pavement. He ruffled his messy brown hair and spoke with a slightly twisted expression on his face. "Prisoners are those who are locked up in prisons, and that also corresponds to having their spirituality and desires constrained by reason, body, and the world. The Beyonders of this sequence of strong bodies and keen senses, often possessing both a staid appearance and a crazy heart within them. They possess many criminal techniques and are proficient in killing with whatever they can casually acquire. The corresponding sequence 8 is lunatic. I believe you aren't aware of this because even an Orthodox Beyonder organization like the 7 Orthodox churches aren't fully aware of such matters. That secret organization's member wields powers that far exceed your imagination. Those nearly twisted bastards abound, be it their bodies or souls. It would be difficult to obtain any useful information by just relying on mediumship and divination. Sharon and I had also put up with this and waited for a very long time before we found a way to remove this binding and successfully escape. As all the Beyonders in this pathway are cursed and have crazy characteristics, we don't want to rely on the 7 major churches. We would lose all our freedom without leaving anything behind. So that's the case. It's no wonder that Talk's confidential information doesn't have much about this. It even lacked the corresponding sequences 8 and 7 of Prisoner. It's something I could know based on the level I had at the time. Klein replied with a sense of enlightenment. I really am not aware of the situation beyond Prisoner. Marek didn't nod as he looked at Klein with his brown eyes and continued, compared to a prisoner. A lunatic's greatest characteristic is to be able to autonomously sacrifice their rationality and let their desires run amok in exchange for strength and enhancements in every aspect. Apart from not having clear thoughts during this period, there isn't much of a problem. They can even gain stronger resistances towards Beyonder powers that can disrupt one's thoughts and influence their mind. To put it simply, I'll get rid of you first, and that will make it impossible for you to kill me. Klein couldn't help but hand pulling. From this sequence onwards, the curse will gradually appear. Lunatics easily lose control, Marek said as his facial muscles twitched. Isn't that obvious? If a person's mental state has been operating at a nadir for a long time, or if there are frequent abnormalities, it would be abnormal if the possibility of losing control isn't higher than other Beyonders. Klein had his own understanding of this. He turned to look at Miss Sharon, feeling that it was hard for him to imagine what she would look like when she was in the prisoner and lunatic stages. And throughout this, Sharon maintained her ghostly silent and ethereal state. Seeing that he hadn't said anything, Marek slowly exhaled and said, "The next sequence is werewolf." The mutation begins. However, in the eyes of normal people, the crazy prisoners and the lunatics who are prone to losing their minds are actually similar to such mutants. Well, werewolf being a sequence 7 is lower than I expected. Klein's thoughts suddenly wandered. Marek didn't notice how he had gone adrift as he continued on. A werewolf is a fully cursed person. Every time the crimson moon becomes full, they will lose part of their sanity, grow black fur, and their bloodlust and desire for tasting blood will reach its peak. His voice gradually became a bit erratic, as if he recalled that bitter experience of enduring and repressing himself. A werewolf has rather powerful rejuvenation abilities, as well as terrifying strength, agility, and speed. Their claws and teeth are in no way inferior to Beyonder weapons of the same sequence, and they contain venom. They also know some darkness-related spells. For instance, targets who are under the werewolf's control will become subordinates after a period of time, when a werewolf's venom infiltrates their body for a period of time. They will become a monster like a werewolf, and typically, these monsters possess very short lifespans. After hearing Marek's explanation, Klein made a pertinent conclusion. At the level of sequence 7, the werewolf is above average in terms of actual combat ability. A werewolf who is always unable to suppress their instinct to kill and their bloodlust during a full moon will turn increasingly cold and more twisted. Gradually, they will lose their feelings that a normal human would have, Marek added. There was an undisguised pride in his tone. It fits Mr. Azaik's description of mutants. Klein subconsciously looked at Miss Sharon, instinctively imagining her werewolf form. However, her cold gaze almost made him shiver, and he quickly turned his head back. Marek unconsciously licked his lips. It wasn't the seductive kind done by women, but the kind that gave people a sense of danger. His gaze seemed to momentarily lose focus, leaving his recollections in unknown. After a few seconds, he opened his mouth again. I'm at the corresponding sequence 6, zombie. Zombie, your outer appearance really does resemble one. It's no wonder you often play cards with a bunch of your own kind. It turns out that you are also a special kind of zombie, a real living zombie. Klein thought for a moment and said, I heard from Kaspars that you aren't afraid of bullets. Marek nodded and said, my body can be as hard as steel. Even if you use the revolver to fire at my head, I'll only feel dizzy at best. You'll need to shoot me 5 times in the same spot before you're able to break my defenses. And even if you break through my defenses, to a zombie, all other forms of damage isn't lethal if the brain isn't destroyed. And my strength has been raised significantly from the foundation of a werewolf. Furthermore, I wield a portion of death-related spells and can easily summon zombies and control ghosts. I can direct them and am proficient at using cold and decaying Beyonder powers. Every sequence in the mutant pathway has different characteristics. There are very few changes in the progressive pathway. Klein pondered for a moment and asked, then, what about the curse of zombie? Marek clenched his teeth and said, I will thirst for the warm blood and fresh meat of humans. During the full moon, this state will be particularly serious. The only thing to be gratified about is that the zombie's curse replaces the werewolf's and lunatic's curse. They do not exist together, and it's the same later on. Every time the crimson moon is full, I will be in great pain. If I don't give up on self-control, I will be in so much pain that I will lose my ability to fight. And if I indulge myself, I will also become less and less like a human, and the risk of losing control is very high. Even in normal times, I would always resist the desires in my heart and the strong malice in my heart. Phew, compared to the Beyonders of other sequences, the others are so much better. Well, except for Abyss and Demoness, Klein suddenly had such a thought. Marek paused and glanced at Sharon. Sharon parted her lips and said in an illusory voice, Sequence 5, Wraith. Wraith, there's such a sequence. It really is a mutant pathway. Klein was slightly surprised at first, but then he felt that this was indeed the characteristic of a spirit body that could be easily transformed. Having received the prompt, Marek added, after becoming a wraith, one can turn one's body into a real wraith and obtain the corresponding powers, such as moving through obstacles, hiding in mirrors, and directly attacking the soul of the enemy. They can jump through most things with reflections. And unlike ordinary wraiths, even with spirit vision, one will find it difficult to discover such a shadow unless they were a high-sequence Beyonder. Yes, Wraith wields many death-type spells. There are many strange techniques, such as forcefully possessing the body and controlling the enemy. Her curse is that on the night of a full moon, she either consumes a certain number of human souls, or she becomes extremely weak. Choosing the former is equivalent to being on the brink of losing control at any moment. Without waiting for Klein to speak, the similarly pale Sharon suddenly said, our target is also a wraith. The Beyonder powers of zombie, werewolf, lunatic, and prisoner won't be lost as a result of advancement, Marek emphasized. It sounds like my nemesis. I'm precisely afraid of the type who are impervious to revolver bullets and do not suffer immense damage when burned by ordinary flames, simply put. I'm afraid of ghosts. Klein felt his heart thump a little. After pondering for a few seconds, he asked, what is the effect of the sealed artifact? Why would they restrain you? It actually made you willing to tell me your weaknesses and your curses. Klein had some general guesses. Marek's expression was somewhat gloomy as he replied, that cursed artifact that needs to be sealed is called Scarlet Lunar Corona. Up to a certain range, it can create effects similar to a full moon. For those who are already cold and warped, it will aid them with explosive strength, but we will become weak and lose our ability to fight. If I give up on myself, then I'd rather choose death, Marek growled hoarsely. I didn't expect a perverted and cowardly fellow like you to be a persistent person. To be able to last until the zombie sequence is indeed extraordinary. Klein didn't interrupt him and listened to the next part of the story. The person who wears the Scarlet Lunar Corona is immune to the effects of the full moon, and they will gain terrifying speed and unimaginable rejuvenation abilities, as well as a number of relatively powerful darkness-related spells. However, it will make the wearer's blood gradually turn cold. They will freeze up, bit by bit, and if they do not stop in time or drink the blood of a living person, they will ultimately die as their blood freezes up completely. Marek seemed to greatly fear the Scarlet Lunar Crow. After he was done, Sharon looked over at Klein with her calm blue eyes. Together with Steve, zombie Jason, and werewolf Tyre. But as long as Steve is finished off, the others wouldn't be a problem. Marek added, if we succeed, the Beyonder characteristic left behind by Steve will be mine. The Scarlet Lunar Corona will belong to Sharon. The remaining spoils of war and the Book of Secrets will be your payment. Very generous conditions. Klein almost couldn't believe his ears. Although the most valuable items are the Sequence 5 Beyonder characteristic and the powerful sealed artifact with special powers, the rest aren't too bad either. It's impossible for a Sequence 5 powerhouse to only have sealed artifacts provided by the organization, and if any one of the Sequence 6 zombie and Sequence 7 werewolf is retained, it will be a bountiful harvest. Klein leaned back and pretended to think, to suppress the sudden greed in his heart. Your conditions are indeed satisfying, he replied and immediately returned with a question. Who is Shaman King Klarman? What kind of information is recorded in his Book of Secrets? Marek rubbed his temples and said, the Shaman King can both refer to a high sequence job and also represent an outstanding person who controls powers in the domains of darkness, the moon, and the strange, one who surpasses his peers. Klarman is the latter, and also the former. He was active in the southern continent during the early part of the Fifth Epoch, and then he completely disappeared. Maybe he was hunted down by the Church of Death or our secret organization, or maybe he died of old age in some unknown place. His Book of Secrets includes knowledge such as secret contracts, rituals, alchemy, astrology, symbolism, natural interaction, and so on. Even if an ordinary person gets it, they can become an expert in the field of mysticism. They can even rely on their own natural spirituality to accomplish a small number of Beyonder matters without taking any potions. Well, the price is that they will slowly become mentally ill. This is the aftermath of one's spirituality being unable to bear the burden. Sounds good, just what I need. However, this mission is not only difficult in itself, but there's also a certain amount of subsequent trouble. I'm dealing with the secret organization with a history of over 1,000 years. Klein was silent for a few seconds, but he still chose to follow his heart. I wish to have some time to think it over. This is a very serious and dangerous matter. I can't be impulsive. I will give you my answer tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Come to my house. You know the address. He looked at Sharon while finishing the sentence. He suddenly felt nervous when he finished it. They had revealed so much important secret information, even problems that plagued them. If he didn't agree on the spot, would he be silenced? or would they follow me until I make up my mind? Then, how can I go above the grey fog to make the divination? Sharon, who was wearing a black regal dress, looked at Klein quietly. There was no anger, doubt, or emotion in her blue eyes. She suddenly pulled out a folded piece of paper from a concealed pocket and unfolded it into a rectangle. The paper was orange-yellow, with many symbols, including those representing the sun. These symbols and labels drew out an empty zone, one which gave off a very warm and stable feeling. As soon as he saw the piece of paper, Klein remembered what it was and relieved his uptight heart. This was also from Numberite Master Osago. This was the notary certificate. Back when they were distributing the spoils of war, Sharon had taken this mystical item. The pale, delicate Sharon handed the notary certificate to Klein and said in a refined voice, "Press your hand here. Promise not to divulge what you just heard." Klein exhaled and nodded seriously. All right. According to the prompt, he took the notary certificate and pressed his palm against the blank area. Then, after some deliberation, he opened his mouth and said, "I promise I won't tell anyone what I just learned from Miss Sharon and Mr. Marek." As he said each word, the symbols and magical labels around the notary certificate lit up, one by one, giving off a warm and bright glow. When it was all over, the light turned into a seal-like image that pressed down on Klein's palm and even passed through it, covering the blank zone. A warm current passed through him, and Klein felt a subtle but invisible connection between himself and the notary certificate. Back then, the ability mimicked by old Mr. Eye of Wisdom really does belong to a notary. He suddenly thought of something from before. "I'm done." Klein returned the notary certificate. Sharon calmly nodded her head and didn't say anything else. Her indifferent figure quickly disappeared from the carriage. Marek, still suppressing the malice in his eyes, tapped the carriage's wall with his finger. The carriage slowly stopped, and the door of the carriage opened. They're using zombies to drive the carriage and shadows to act as attendants. It really is Marek's style. After activating his spirit vision, Klein took off his cap in enlightenment, pressed it to his chest, bowed slightly, and got off the carriage. It was a quiet street, one where several of the street lamps were broken, but no one had fixed them. Klein first went to his one-room apartment in East Borough before returning to 15 Minsk Street and pretended to make 2 divinations in the living room. The first time was whether or not he should accept this commission. The second time was whether or not it was dangerous, and how dangerous it was. As for the answer to the divination, he didn't pay close attention to it, because wraiths of the mutant pathway could transform into spirit bodies, allowing them to directly interact with the spirit world to obtain information. In other words, they naturally possessed the power of divination and anti-divination, so regardless of whether it was Sharon or the target Steve, the revelation that Klein received was either wrong or deviated. After he finished his divination, he read the newspapers and books, as he usually did. He practiced his beyond powers in the activity room, then he washed up and went to sleep. There was nothing abnormal about it. At 4:10 in the morning, Klein suddenly woke up and jumped out of bed. He found a candle, built a wall of spirituality, and quietly began the ritual of summoning himself. Then, he took 4 steps counterclockwise and went above the grey fog, but he was in no hurry to respond to the prayer. Sitting in a high-back chair belonging to the fool, Klein focused on the surface of the long bronze table. He saw the all-black eye, Azite's copper whistle, the dark emperor card, and the dark, majestic figure of Vassell holding a scepter. The corner of his mouth twitched, and Klein stretched out his right hand to turn the card of blasphemy upside down. "What I can't see can't hurt me." After conjuring a pen and paper, he took off his topaz pendulum and repeated his first 2 divinations. The result of the first divination rotated clockwise at an adequate frequency. That was to say that the commission should be accepted, but it also wasn't necessary. The result of the second divination was the counterclockwise rotation of the topaz pendulum, but it spun with great amplitude and frequency. Klein's interpretation was that there was danger, quite considerable danger, but it wasn't life-threatening, yet as long as it was properly dealt with. Few after remaining silent for a few seconds, Klein remembered a hunch from before. Perhaps every magician needs to perform. Otherwise, the name of the potion would be Midge, not magician. The key to never perform unprepared is to be prepared, as well as to perform, and this may not just be in combat. The 2 assumptions of diverting the enemy's attention and getting the applause of the audience is predicated on there being a performance. As long as I can find the appropriate solution, disguise myself well, and deal with it perfectly, it will be hard for the Rose School of Thought to find me. Many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind. Combined with the revelation he had just received from the divination, he quickly came to a decision. Leaning back against the fool's high back chair, he raised his head to look at the towering ancient palace and the boundless grey fog and revealed a slight smile. "Then, let's have a grand performance." With that, he took the all-black eye and Azite's copper whistle and responded to his own prayers. The next morning was a Thursday morning. Klein, who had bought the ingredients early, prepared homemade Finapota noodles, which was closer to the noodles mixed with meat sauce. He went to the door to take out today's newspaper from the mailbox. As he ate, he found a notice of a Beyond gathering in the Backland Morning Post. As expected, once the tense situation is resolved, the gatherings begin. Klein smiled and said to himself. At 9 o'clock, he took out his golden pocket watch, opened it, and took a look. Then, he faced the empty living room and said to the oriel window, "I'm willing to provide help. The conditions are exactly as you said." but that's only if you give me a few more days. He paused for a moment before replying with a smile. I need to make some preparations. Other than Klein, there was no one else in the living room, but suddenly, an illusionary voice rang out. Okay. After you've finished preparing, you can pay the bar a visit. In Viscount Blaine's study, Audrey was sitting in a chair, helping Susie straighten the fur on the back of her head. She said to Force and Xio, who was sitting quietly beside her while sipping their wine, "Why were you in such a hurry to bring me here?" Although this was the first time she had seen Force and Xio since the incident with Lanny Vass, she had already paid them through Susie. Well, after joining us at the Tarot Club, Force seems to remain unchanged. She's still languid and fond of being snide with Xio, but there are some things about her that are completely different. She used to be dispirited, depressed, and she seemed to hold little hope for the future, but now, that aspect has completely disappeared. Audrey, the telepathist, smiled faintly and observed the state of Miss Magician with a calm heart. After downing the rest of the red wine, Force said, "It is indeed Dormier, the most famous red wine. It's much better than the ones I've drunk before. The level is very clear and each level has a different feeling." She put down her wine cup and said, "The gathering that might have the Spectator and clues to the psychology alchemists will be held this afternoon." "Is that so? Why the rush?" Audrey asked, puzzled. Force explained with a smile, "Because the serial killer has wasted too much of everyone's time. Moreover, that's the outskirts of Northborough. It's during the afternoon when the talks are most relaxed." Okay, Audrey nodded lightly and didn't ask any further. At the same time, her gaze swept across the room, and she sighed silently. Compared to the past, Xio is a lot quieter compared to the present Force. At that moment, Viscount Blaine chuckled and said, "Audrey, I will go with you." "Why?" Audrey asked despite knowing the answer. Blaine cleared his throat and said, "It's because I've already obtained the apothecary formula. All I need to do is trade for some ingredients. My vault doesn't have the two corresponding ingredients." "Oh," Force sold it to me, £300. "She guarantees that it's authentic." £300. I remember that you bought it from Mr. World for only £230. Audrey couldn't help but glance at Force. In the suburbs of Northborough, in a soon-to-be-abandoned three-story medical school building. Even at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the fog in the clouds had already darkened the whole of Backland, as if a storm was approaching. Along the dilapidated corridor, the gloomy light shone in diagonally, penetrating the windows and causing everything to appear silent and scarred. It was eerie and terrifying. This was Audrey's second time here, and she was no longer as nervous and tense as before. She turned her head left and right in her surgical cap and big mask, habitually observing the environment, observing every detail of this place. Viscount Blaine was walking beside her and gradually turned apprehensive. He couldn't help but whisper, "Why do I find that this place is a little strange? Could there be evil ghosts?" As a mysticism enthusiast who had only half a foot in the Beyonder circle, the only beyond the phenomenon he had witnessed was forces passing through walls and the opening of a door. He was still unsure of the existence of wraiths and shadows. However, this didn't stop him from being afraid of similar monsters. Force turned her head and shot him a glance as she held back her laughter. Most of the participants of this gathering are Beyonders. If they really are evil ghosts or spirits, they would definitely be very happy. It usually implies ingredients or servants. Noticing that Viscount Blaine was obviously relieved, she purposely added, "Of course, I'm only talking about the weaker kind of ghosts. A truly formed shadow might be able to kill everyone here without making a sound. And even if you run, all you can do is run back and forth between the 3 stories without being able to leave. It's like entering a maze." Xio nodded in approval. "I've once encountered a similar wraith. I ran in circles while in the cemetery without any means of escaping. During this process, there were baffled people who would turn their heads for no reason, only to suffer a sudden death. If not for one of the Beyonders carrying a sun charm, perhaps you wouldn't be seeing me here today." Viscount Blaine shivered as he looked out the window. At this moment, a withered tree branch hit the glass and made a light sound as it was blown by the cold wind. Blaine almost shouted out loud as he frantically inched towards the 2 Beyonders, forcing Xio. Audrey resisted smiling and quietly watched this scene from the sidelines. In her heart, she thought, "I have met Mr. Fool, who is close to a deity. I know the city of Silver in the forsaken land of the gods. I have heard of all kinds of terrifying monsters in the depths of the darkness. Why would I fear wraiths and shadows? However, I really haven't met a ghost yet." "Pyre, Audrey, what are you thinking?" "It's better not to come across this kind of thing. Unless I become a psychiatrist with Beyonder powers capable of influencing other creatures, or if I obtain mystical items that can restrain ghosts and monsters." The 4 of them couldn't help but increase their pace and quickly arrived at the gathering venue for the day. Before she entered, Force found an opportunity to bend her back and whisper into Xio's ear, "You did well cooperating with me just now. You actually made up a story so quickly that's enough to frighten others. Look at the spot switch and covered by Viscount Blaine's mask. It's so white that you can't see any colors." Xio turned her head as she answered blankly, "I didn't make up the story. That was something that happened to me before I came to Backland." Force was stunned for a moment before she blurted out the question, "For real?" "Why would I lie?" Xio's puzzled face was obscured by the mask. Force turned her head and took 2 steps forward and suddenly shivered. At that moment, Blaine didn't wish to stay in the creepy corridor any longer. He reached out his hand and pushed open the door to the gathering venue. As the creaking sound echoed, he saw the concrete floor and the smell of antiseptic coming into his nose. It made him frown. Soon after, he saw a large pool in the middle. It was filled with a clear, yellow liquid, and there were floating figures inside it. Some of the figures were entirely naked. Some were rather complete, while others had half their skin ripped off. They had the brownish auburn colors of beef jerky. They were corpses. Ah! A man's shrill cry resounded in the room. Gazes were instantly cast onto Blaine. These gazes were all from the figures in white coats surrounding the pool. They were also wearing surgical caps and huge masks, and only their eyes and the bit of their skin were exposed. Blaine's body swayed a bit. He wanted to turn around and run away, but when he saw Audrey, Force, and Xio pass him, as if nothing had happened, in order to enter his room, he realized that they were pretending that they weren't his companions. As he took a deep breath, Blaine nearly vomited. He looked outside and saw that the corridor was dark and gloomy, filled with shadows, and that there wasn't a single living soul in sight. With another shudder, Blaine hastened his steps and caught up with Audrey and the others, finding a place to sit down as far as possible from the pool. After a few minutes, a figure wearing a white coat stepped out of the line and used a wooden pole with a hook on the side to pull a corpse to the side. Then, he directly dragged the corpse to the concrete floor. He paused for about 3 seconds, took out a scalpel, and slit open the body's abdomen. As the gash deepened, a cold and hoarse voice suddenly sounded from inside. Let the gathering begin. Blaine reached out with his hand to press down his mask. His throat moved a few times and he almost vomited. They were midway in the gathering with all kinds of trades either a success or failure happening. Audrey, who had been calmly observing all this time, finally opened her mouth and said, "I want the spectator potion formula." Before she could finish her sentence, she felt several gazes sweep over her. However, they quickly moved away and didn't linger for long. After several seconds of silence, the transaction was aborted. Around 4 in the afternoon, it was getting closer to night. Why was there nothing at all? Blaine didn't maintain his aristocratic demeanor as he slumped against the wooden wall of the carriage and sighed. This beyond the gathering had left a deep impression on him, making him feel as if he had taken a huge risk. But even so, he was still unable to buy the horn of an adult flying unicorn and the venom crystal of a royal jellyfish. Force secretly pursed his lips and said, "That's normal. Although Backlund is the easiest place to get ingredients, if you can't join every beyond the gathering, there will still be situations in which you won't be able to find what you want for a long time. It requires either luck or patience. Mr. Viscount, think about Miss Audrey's spectator potion. She hasn't received any clues to date. Sometimes you can encounter the ingredients, but you would lack the money to buy them." Xio, who was sitting to the side, thought in exasperation. Audrey consoled Blaine, "When I get back, I'll go to my family's vault and do a search. Maybe there's something you want." She had brought the rainbow salamander's pituitary gland with her today, but she hadn't encountered the spinal fluid of a Farsman rabbit. Therefore, she had only exchanged it for £320 in cash. It was to prepare for Susie's advancement. Blaine nodded, and just as he was about to open his mouth, he saw Xio sitting up straight. She frowned and said, "It seems like someone is following us." "I trust your intuition. What do we do now?" Force asked, looking around. "Following us? Why follow us? All we did was sell one beyond item and obtain a few £100 in cash. Even if someone wanted to rob us, we shouldn't be the top targets. Although Blaine acted like a rookie, we didn't in addition. The gathering's organizer had done a lot of things to ensure the safety of the members and to prevent anyone from being followed. Unless the person who sent the tracker is the organizer. Last time, everything seemed normal." What's the difference between the two occasions? Audrey's mind raced when she suddenly came up with an idea. Perhaps it was my request to purchase the spectator formula that attracted the attention of the psychology alchemists. It's impossible for them to randomly sell the spectator formula, so what would inevitably follow is recruitment into the organization. And recruitment isn't a simple matter. One has to be wary of any quasi-talks or quasi-mandated punishers, or spies sent by other hidden factions. If they don't observe the target and conduct an investigation, the organization would quickly be destroyed. After pondering for a few seconds, Audrey said to Force and the others, "Prepare to be attacked. Pretend as though you didn't notice the tracker. If we can successfully return to Empress Borough, don't worry about exposing the identities of Blaine and me. Both of you have to leave in secret." Her green eyes swept over Blaine, and she added with a smile, "A lot of people know that we are mysticism enthusiasts. So it's normal for us to find an opportunity to participate in a Beyonder gathering. Even if the tracker is an official Beyonder, they won't suspect anything. We are just regular people, so all they will do is warn us through other channels. But I'm already at Sequence HQ in order to come into contact with the psychology alchemists. I have to take a little risk. It's likely the official Beyonders won't target me for seeking to purchase a formula. They shouldn't be able to bypass the gathering organizer and track us down. I want to believe in my own judgment." Audrey cheered herself on. "Okay," Viscount Blaine mumbled as he agreed. The horse carriage continued on as usual, going in circles a few times. In the end, Audrey and the others changed to another carriage as they had planned. Throughout this process, the tracker never attacked. When they reached the back door of Viscount Blaine's mansion in Empress Borough, the two nobles used their usual means of returning. As for Force and Xio, they each relied on their own skills to leave. About 10 minutes later, Audrey, accompanied by her huge golden retriever, Susie, and her maids, openly left through the front door, in her own carriage. As she listened to the sound of rolling wheels, she was unable to confirm if there were still people following her. She could only let her thoughts wander. It's obvious that the daughter of Count Hall isn't a spy of any beyond the fashion. There's nothing wrong with her past. Her love for mysticism is well known. Her status and identity can provide assistance that's different from other people. Perhaps, in 2 days, there will be members of the psychology alchemists who will try to come into contact with me, or he thought with some anticipation and some nervousness. Although he said he was making preparations, Klein spent 2 days at the Quidditch Club as if nothing had happened. He even played a game of cards with the equestrian teacher, Talim, and the others, winning a few soldi. Before he went to bed, he didn't forget to visit the outside of Lawyer Judgen's house to make sure if there were no lights and to feed the cat. At 8 o'clock on Friday night, he put on his iron mask and wore his black hooded robe and entered the activity room of old Mr. Eye of Wisdom. The only candle flickered its yellow flame, casting shadows on the walls around the activity room. Klein found the most convenient escape point before surveying his surroundings. He saw the Eye of Wisdom with his deep cheek lines and the plump apothecary. Well, after another comparison, even though he's wearing an iron mask that covers half his face, it's still pretty clear that he was the man I met at Rice Circus who deserves a beating. Klein looked away and waited for the gathering to officially begin. The woman who had an artisan backing her was very hidden among the participants, so he couldn't be sure that she was present before she spoke. After a few minutes, Eye of Wisdom raised his head to look at the mechanical clock on the wall and chuckled. There's a lot of people here today. Let's begin. Before he finished speaking, the plump apothecary rushed to speak. I need a Beyonder creature for an experiment. It's best if it's an animal, and it's best if it's already restrained and one that's not too dangerous. A beast-type Beyonder creature? Klein was slightly moved. He remembered what the apothecary had said in the circus theatre, and that he was apparently able to read the thoughts of beasts. He's just an apothecary, yet he poses such an ability, and is even looking to purchase a beast-type Beyonder creature. After I sold him the Spring of Elves Marrow Crystal, he should have gathered the ingredients, and advanced to the next sequence. In other words, the sequence after apothecary has something to do directing wild beasts. Klein made a deduction based on the information he knew. At this moment, someone responded to the apothecary with a sneer, who would keep a Beyonder creature by their side. It's dangerous and easily discovered. Wouldn't it be easier and more concealed to kill them to obtain its Beyonder ingredients? The apothecary was a person who refused to lose in a spar of words, so he immediately sneered. What a foolish thought. You can't guarantee that the Beyonder ingredient on a Beyonder creature is exactly what you need and that you can definitely sell it. You might as well tame it and direct it to be your helper, increasing your strength severalfold. As he spoke, his voice gradually grew softer. He felt as if he had revealed some important secret. Damn it, why can't I control this mouth of mine? The apothecary figuratively smacked himself in the heart. As expected, Klein nodded indiscernibly. Without a doubt, the apothecary's request wasn't met. Most of the participants here were low-sequence Beyonders, and their statuses in Backland weren't very prominent. With the need for them to be relatively alert, to the point of barely maintaining it, so how was it possible for them to extravagantly rear a Beyonder creature? Furthermore, more importantly, there was the fact that wild Beyonder creatures were usually hostile to humans. Any encounter would usually lead to one dead, so if one wanted to capture them alive, they would need to have a sufficiently strong team or be strong enough to overwhelm the enemy. Of course, this didn't exclude particular Beyonders who possessed special abilities that were suitable for such situations. After a bout of disappointment, the apothecary coughed lightly and said, I've brought quite a few bottles of medicine. All of you know the effects. If you want them, you can speak up when the gathering is almost over. The few medicines to treat wounds, go berserk, and increase one's ability in that aspect. Klein silently lampooned. He chuckled and provided a suggestion. You can purchase a Sequence 9 formula, find the corresponding Beyonder ingredients, and then concoct the potion to feed the animal you fancy. This way, you will have a Sequence 9 Beyonder creature, and you can also continuously advance it with the subsequent potions. Of course, that's built on the premise that you are rich enough and can deal with the defective ones that lose control. The apothecary was stunned for a few seconds. After a while, he said, how extravagant. Just saving up money and finding the Beyonder ingredients for myself is difficult enough for me. It's also a high probability event for an animal to lose control after they consume potions. It will take me several times before I succeed. Someone who can do this must have a mine or owns a bank. Our tarot club's Miss Justice likely rears a Beyonder creature. Klein suddenly felt sorry for the apothecary. If one wanted to disregard it for the sole purpose of earning money, apothecaries were the easiest among the low-sequence Beyonders to amass large amounts of wealth. The problem was that they were also easily targeted by the official Beyonders. After a few more deals or failed transactions, Klein heard a voice that was deliberately suppressed. I only brought one Beyonder weapon this time. They are 50 bullets with different effects. 20 of them are engraved with the Sun Domain's labels and symbols, forming a complete charm. They can be used to purify ghost-related monsters. They cause more damage to wraiths and shadows, so they are called purifying bullets. There are another 20 bullets which are meant for corrupted creatures, known as demon-hunting bullets. The other 10 are bullets that counter evil-type monsters, known as exorcism bullets. Their effects can be maintained for 18 months or more. 50 bullets for £500, or the Barbarian Potion formula. It will come with a revolver with the matching caliber. They did make related bullets according to my suggestions from last time. From the looks of it, they're more complicated than ordinary Beyonder weapons. It took them so long only to make a set. Klein didn't give the others a chance and directly said, I have the Barbarian Potion formula. At this moment, a rather tall man offered a price. £550. In this day and age, a revolver was the most convenient Beyonder weapon to use and carry. The well-hidden lady's voice was filled with unquenchable joy as she said, Sir, I'm sorry. I have a preference for the Barbarian formula. £600. The man raised the offer again. No, this is not about money. The woman with an artisan backing her glanced at Klein. Deal, but please pass the formula to old Mr. I of Wisdom for his notarization. Phew, it's a good thing that I got the Dark Emperor card. Otherwise, if I met someone who can raise the price so ruthlessly, I definitely would have lost a lot of money today. Klein rolled up his robe, took out the Barbarian formula which he had long written from his inner pocket, and opened it to take a look. Sequence A Barbarian. Main ingredients, Grass of Madness, core horn crystal of a land rhinoceros. Supplementary ingredients, 1 deep-grained walnut, 1 fragrance hornet grass, 10 milliliters of the extract obtained from soaking poplar bark, 100 milliliters of liquor. After confirming that it was correct, Klein folded the paper and handed it to the attendant. Just like before, Eye of Wisdom took out the ring that was inlaid with many small diamonds. He mimicked the Beyonder powers of a notary and confirmed that the formula was true. Hearing this old man declare that the formula is valid, the woman with the artisan backing her heaved a sigh of relief and took out a square iron box the size of a palm. After the attendant passed the formula to her, she eagerly rolled it open and read it a few times, as if she wanted to memorize it directly. As for Klein, he snapped open the box and looked at it. There were 3 piles of bullets inside the metal box. One pile had a faint golden luster, as though they had just been fished out of hot water. The other was entirely silver and covered with patterns, cold yet sacred. The pile with the fewest bullets suffused a golden sheen amidst the brass color. He could vaguely see several labels and symbols engraved on it. Yes, it's authentic. Klein had the ability to appraise the bullets in the field of mysticism. He snapped the lid shut and stored the item in the pocket under his robe. As for the free revolver, it was nothing special. The body of the gun was a deeper brass color, and the handle was made out of walnut wood. Since his underarm holster had also been lost back when he encountered the police inspection, Klein had to attach the revolver to his waist and cover it with his clothes. After finishing the transaction, he looked around the activity room and deliberately raised his voice. I need strong purifying items like sun holy water and sun sacred emblem. I can buy it in gold, or I can use formulas as a barter, like the sequence after Barbarian Briber. Of course, if there are any questions regarding the mysticism and the Beyonder world that requires answering, I can also give it a try, but I can't guarantee that I can answer it. As the apothecary listened, he widened his eyes. He had a feeling that this was that lucky lad. However, he had just become a Beyonder not long ago, so how could he have obtained so many valuable things? The more he thought about it, the more he gnashed his teeth, feeling as if he had made the wrong choice back then. Luck was the most important thing. The woman who had bought the Barbarian formula couldn't control herself and almost said in her original voice, I don't have anything you need, but I can pay you in cash. £800. Klein swallowed the word deal that he nearly said. He thought for a moment before chuckling. I'm only accepting bartering for the time being. I will most likely be back for the next gathering. You can seek out the relevant items in advance. For the time being, the lady ruminated over the word and nodded slowly. All right. After that, no one else said anything, and Klein's needs were also not met. In Backland, in the Lowen Kingdom, the worshippers of the eternal blazing sun could be considered heretics, so few of such items circulated beyond official channels. Klein was slightly disappointed, but he wasn't too concerned. He had an alternative plan. He clearly remembered that Miss Xio had once sought out a Beyonder believer of the eternal blazing sun for purification. And the lady who craved the briber formula would definitely be actively looking for his desired items. Klein stopped talking and listened to the subsequent exchanges. When the gathering was coming to an end, an average-built participant with no special characteristics pinched the iron mask on his face and said with a deep baritone voice, I need an adult black widow spider silk gland. An adult black widow spider silk gland? Sounds familiar. I seem to have heard of it somewhere. Klein frowned slightly. Without using divination, he tried hard to recall where. Suddenly, he remembered the source of the familiar feeling. It was one of the main ingredients for the Demoness of Pleasure. Pleasure was sequence 6 of the Demoness pathway. Klein had obtained its complete formula back when he channeled Madame Sharon's spirit. Although it was usually difficult to recall the exact details, and he had to rely on the help of dream divination to recall the memory, just hearing the main ingredient was enough to give him a sense of familiarity and make him form connections. He couldn't help but glance over at the buyer, confirming that he was male in terms of skin color, figure, voice, and unmasked facial features. The sequence prior to Demoness of Pleasure is witch. Regardless of their gender, as long as they passed that, they would all become women. This person clearly isn't one. He hasn't become a witch yet, so why is he purchasing the main ingredient of a Demoness of Pleasure? Whom could he be helping someone buy it? Is he the ally of some witch or a loyal subordinate? However, as a rather ancient secret organization, the Demoness sect shouldn't be lacking in the corresponding ingredients. With their natural disposition, it would be normal for them to use the beyond characteristics left behind by former members to concoct the potions. Did the witch behind the buyer lose her connection with the organization? With these thoughts, Klein had the impulse to follow him. However, after careful consideration, he gave up on this idea. Ignoring the question on how he could bypass the precautionary measures of Eye of Wisdom and lock on to the other party's tracks, just the fact that the other party's situation was unknown. And with him not having the time to perform a divination, it was enough for him to choose to follow his heart's wishes. What if there isn't only one witch, but a beyonder who's much stronger? Moreover, it's a good thing for witches to advance to demoness of pleasure. The former would cause calamities and harm many innocent people, but once they advance to the latter, their goal would be focused on pleasure. In simple terms, society would be less dangerous. Klein mumbled. An adult black widow spider silk gland was already considered to be relatively expensive and a rare beyonder ingredient. It was just like the thousand-faced hunter's mutated pituitary gland and a characteristic of a human skinned shadow which Klein needed in order to ascend to sequence 6. It was almost equivalent to the cost of half a house in the capital, so the buyer didn't receive a satisfactory response. To be precise, no one responded. The atmosphere of the gathering fell silent until the plump apothecary started selling the medicine he brought. After the previous trials, he received quite a few repeat customers. In less than 3 minutes, he had sold all the goods he could sell and collected more than £50 in cash. As Eye of Wisdom announced at the end of the gathering, each participant left through different passages in a different order and at different intervals. Klein was in the middle, and after he reached a secluded street, he took off his disguise and immediately set off for East Borough, arriving at Black Palm Street on that cold and foul-smelling night. On the way, he had purchased an armpit holster. He entering his rented one-bedroom apartment. Without taking a break, he took out his revolver and opened the metal box containing the beyonder bullets. He then took out 2 purifying bullets, 2 demon-hunting bullets, and 1 exorcism bullet. Then, he loaded them one by one into the chamber. Taking a pose, he tested the feeling and whether he could fire normally. Klein inserted the revolver into his armpit and busied himself with other preparations. For example, he checked to see if there was anything unusual about the all-black eye and the iron cigarette case. He also placed the Zyg's copper whistle in the metal box containing the bullets, and with the help of Holy Night powder, he created a sealed wall of spirituality that stuck to the surface of the box, completing the shielding of the ancient, delicate copper whistle. After confirming the shapes and positions of the 3 charms, Klein headed above the grey fog for divination. Then, he put on his cap and went out again. His target was 32 Verdi Street, which was south of the bridge. It was where the thief had found the master key. There might be clues to the apprentice formula or clues to related items there. It was somewhere that Klein had long wanted to explore, but he suspected that the man who died a tragic death had turned into a wraith-like creature. He didn't dare to take action until he bought purifying bullets. A magician never performs unprepared. Before the steam subway, the most economical mode of transport, had stopped running, Klein arrived south of the bridge before transferring to a public carriage and arrived near Verdi Street. It was already late at night, and a chilling drizzle filled Backland. There were barely any pedestrians on the street, and the light from the gas lamps was blurred by the liquid on the glass, making everything seem dreamlike. Klein circled the area and observed Unit 32 single quote situation. He walked to its side, climbed to the 2nd floor, and easily entered the target's interior from the balcony door, which clearly couldn't be closed by the thief from before. He didn't bring the master key, fearing that the item would cause an abnormal chain reaction here. The layout of the house was very normal. A corridor that connected the 2 balconies ran through the entire 2nd floor. There were bedrooms, a bathroom, a solarium, and an activity room lining the sides. With the help of the crimson moonlight shining in from the balcony, Klein saw that all the doors had been opened. All kinds of items were thrown on the ground in disarray. It should be the result from the thief from before. He couldn't take away all the items, so he could only search for the most valuable ones. However, with the master key, there's no need for him to open doors. Klein went through the rooms, one by one, looking for things that might be involved with mysticism. After an unknown period of time, a black-gloved Klein arrived at the staircase without any success. Just as he took 2 steps forward, a figure suddenly appeared before him. The figure was pressed against the wall at the corner of the stairs, its back was facing Klein. Its black hair was so thick that it almost covered its neck. Klein, who had long activated his spirit vision, didn't even have time to observe, for the figure suddenly moved. His neck creaked as he turned his head, while his back remained facing the 2nd floor. Amidst the hazy, weak, and illusory crimson illumination, the figure's eyes were bulging out of their sockets, filled with fear. Thud, thud. The 2 eyeballs hit the ground. Bang! The figure's head fell off its neck and hit a wooden staircase. He's long dead. He's without any spirituality. Klein watched and judged calmly, as though what had just happened was a farce. He guessed from the details of the man's old black clothes and the number of rooms open on the 2nd floor, and he decided that this was another burglar. One who had visited the house after the previous one. Unfortunately, he wasn't that lucky. Could it be that the master key was actually restraining the danger here, and when it was taken away, pandemonium was set loose? Klein drew his revolver, adjusted the chamber to the firing position, and cocked the revolver. He walked up the stairs to the corpse. He squatted down and examined it briefly, but he couldn't find anything other than the fact that his neck had been twisted. After pondering for a few seconds, Klein straightened his body and carefully went down the stairs. Even though he was standing on a wooden staircase, he didn't make any creaking sounds. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. After walking down the flight of stairs, he reached the ground. In front of him was a corridor that connected the two sides. The crimson moonlight shone in, outlining the outline of the balcony. The doors on both sides of the corridor were wide open, revealing a messy scene of scattered items. There was no living room, dining room, or kitchen here. This is the second floor. Klein went down from the second floor, only to return to the second floor. Throughout the entire process, he didn't discover anything out of the ordinary. Klein didn't panic as he slowly turned around. Behind him, there was a staircase leading downwards. That is to say, my special ability can only resist the invasion of my beyonder powers through the use of beyonder powers such as dreams and spirit channeling. Or for me to realize that the environment I'm in does not belong to the real world. I'll still be influenced by hallucinations. Klein took out his matchbox and took out a few matches with his gun-carrying hand. He continued down, throwing a match down every few steps. Once again Klein came to the corner of the stairs and saw the dead body with its head separated from its body. At this moment, a cold wind blew across the back of his neck, causing his hair to stand on end. Pa! Klein snapped his fingers, and a red flame soared from behind him, soaring toward the ceiling. Those flames seemed to be a monster that was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, but the flames didn't burn anything. Klein was about to turn around and look with his spirit vision when his body suddenly froze, as if he had fallen into a lake frozen in winter. He couldn't help but tremble as his left hand was slowly reaching for his neck as he forcibly suppressed it. At that moment, Klein sighed softly. He forced his left hand into his pocket, removed the wall of spirituality, and opened the metal box containing the bullets. Next, he held Isaac's copper whistle, took it out, shook it, and threw it into the air above the stairs. In almost an instant, he felt the coldness and stiffness in his body disappear. In his spiritual perception, a sinister and cold mass leaped out like a dog fetching a ball as it pounced at Isaac's copper whistle. Klein smiled, raised his right hand, aimed at the copper whistle, and pulled the trigger. He softly said, "Bye-bye." Bang! The pale gold purifying bullet flew out and accurately hit the cold and indistinct object. A blood-curdling screech sounded out as the golden flames outlined a human silhouette in mid-air. Under the bright and warm light, all the coldness and deadliness quickly disappeared. Clang! Isaac's copper whistle landed on the ground, bounced a few times, and rolled to the living room on the first floor. When Klein looked around, he saw that things were now significantly different. For example, the head of the corpse wasn't separated from its body. He had strangled himself with his own hands. Hey, it really is easy when you're prepared. Klein chuckled and went down the stairs again. He successfully reached the first floor and picked up Isaac's copper whistle. He then swung it twice to see if there were any other wraiths or shadows here. After confirming that there were no more problems, he decided to head straight to the basement. As he walked down the flight of stairs and went through the door, he saw the picture he had seen in his dream divination. He saw the brown notebook on the long table. Other than the master key and the silver pocket watch with inlaid diamonds which were taken by the thief. This place is still in the same state as what I'd seen in my dream. Klein looked around and saw black iron pots, glass jars, and bronze lampstands that had candles which had long since been extinguished. His spirit vision and spiritual perception told him that these were all very ordinary items. They didn't carry the slightest trace of a spiritual luster. But compared to before, there's still something extra. Klein reached out with his left black glove palm and touched the surface of the long table. His fingers were immediately stained with visible dust. After carefully and making some preliminary divinations, Klein failed to find any secret chambers or hidden compartments. Thus, he turned his attention to the brown notebook. Carefully flipping through it, the contents of the first page entered his eyes. This will go into the annals of the rise of a cursed family. I want to remember every key point. Future descendants, please remember every word that I've said. It's a pity that you lost control and died just moments after taking the Sequence 9 potion. The illustrious glory of the Abraham family can only remain as words. Klein lampooned under his breath and continued reading, quickly flipping through the pages. He planned to take the notebook away once he confirmed its value, not planning to stay any longer. We, the Abraham family, were one of the most powerful nobles of the Fourth Epoch, and we were the main supporters of the Tudor dynasty. In that era, be it Lorenz Augustus family, Fasax Einhorn family, Intissus Soren family, or Phonopotas Castilla family, all of them looked up to us. Indeed, they weren't weak back then, but we were stronger. Even the Rumat Antigonus family and the Zeratal families were slightly weaker than us. Unfortunately, the glory of our family disappeared in the War of the Four Emperors. Ancestor Bethel went missing in that war where the deities personally fought. The remaining high sequence beyonders all perished. Ever since then, our Abraham family has been under a terrible curse. Generations after generations of ancestors have attempted to revive our family, but without exception, all of them went mad and lost control. Some of them did so just before becoming a high sequence beyonder or at sequence 7 and 8. And every case of losing control brings about a disaster that is close to annihilating the family. The accursed forget the family name carved in their bloodlines and hurt the other members of the family without restraint. They were already monsters. For the continuation of the family, the Abraham family made a painful decision to no longer live together. Instead, it split up into small families that migrated to various parts of the northern continent. That way, even if someone lost control and started a massacre, their bloodline wouldn't be cut off because of this. My father was afraid of the curse, so he chose to remain as an ordinary person. If it wasn't for the fact that the bloodline's last name is still ever shining, he wouldn't even be willing to tell me these things. I want to record this down. I want to keep it on my mind. I want to remember the glory and the disaster of the Abraham family. Every Beyonder generation would eventually lose control without exception. The curse of the Abraham family is even more terrifying than that of the city of Silver. Wait a minute, they should all be from the apprentice pathway. Could it be that they heard Mr. Dawes' plea for help? This isn't a cry for help. It's clearly a life-depriving curse. However, according to Miss Magician's description, it isn't because she became an apprentice that she had heard those illusory ravings during the full moon, but because of her use of the bracelet on her wrist. Afterwards, she couldn't escape the ravings regardless of whether she wore it or not. And what's the reason for those Beyonders of the Abraham family? Perhaps the curse has nothing to do with Mr. Daw? Well, the notebook mentioned that the ancestor of the Abraham family, Bethel Abraham, had disappeared in the War of the Four Emperors. Could he be Mr. Daw? He was banished from the real world, lost in the darkness, and left trapped in a storm. There's a possibility that the easiest target to ask for help would naturally be descendants from the same bloodline who are of the same Beyonder pathway, but of a relatively lower sequence. It's a pity that because all the powerful Beyonders had perished, his shouts only bring about a curse on the family that has lasted for more than 1,000 years, almost causing the whole Abraham family to disappear. Is this the reason why Mr. Daw is so aware of the history of the Fourth Epoch and the details of the War of the Four Emperors? If my suspicions are true, I can only exclaim, the Abrahams really are an unfortunate family. I wonder if the things mentioned by the owner of the notebook were affected by the passage of time of over 1,000 years and the separation of the family, which might result in discrepancies in the War of the Four Emperors. The deities actually personally participated in battle. Klein slightly frowned, and the speed at which he flipped the pages became faster and faster. Father, who chose to remain an ordinary person, ultimately succumbed to his disease. This dealt my mother a huge blow, and she quickly departed with him. And that means I'm free. But what hurts me is that father didn't tell me many things about Beyonders to prevent me from embarking down the cursed path. I have to come into contact with them myself and understand them. Thankfully, he didn't violate the orders of the Elder. He still handed me the potion formula of apprentice, trick master, and astrologer at his deathbed. I will repeat the 3 formulas to prevent myself from forgetting. Sequence 9, apprentice. Sequence 8, trick master. Sequence 7, astrologer. After Klein saw that, he pricked his eyebrows slightly, feeling that the trick tonight had been worthwhile, and that he hadn't wasted the purifying bullet. Of course, he still had to go above the grey fog to confirm its authenticity. Astrologer, the apprentice pathway, actually has a divination series job as well. In that case, one of my speculations from the past might be closer to the truth. The seer pathway and the apprentice pathway might be interchangeable at high sequences. Klein nodded slightly and continued to flip through the pages. Although he had already determined the value of the notes, he didn't want to leave the scene for the time being. If the last few pages of the notebook noted that something had been hidden somewhere, he would definitely have to come back again. Since that was the case, why go through so much trouble? As the pages turned, Klein roughly figured out the Beyonder history of this Abraham descendant. After his parents died, he began trying to touch base with the mysticism circles to gather information about the sequence potions and purchase the corresponding Beyonder ingredients. After 2 years of hard work, recording many still unconfirmed mysticism knowledge, he finally succeeded and concocted the apprentice potion. At the end of the notebook, he wrote, "According to my knowledge of mysticism, the spirit world and the real world would overlap the most on the night of the full moon. That is the time when one's spirituality is at its best, and it is also the most suitable time to consume the potion and advance. I will become an apprentice by the next full moon. I need to get stronger, step by step, and reproduce the illustrious glory of the Abraham family. Once I reach sequence 7, I'll be able to contact the elders according to the regulations set by the family. I know the method of communication well, so this is a secret that cannot be recorded. Take a potion to advance yourself during the full moon." Klein was stunned for a moment. He couldn't help but tap his chest 4 times in a clockwise manner to draw the crimson moon. May the goddess forgive you for your ignorance. Klein vaguely understood why the man had lost control on the spot. According to his speculation, the curse that had plagued the Abraham family for more than 1,000 years was probably related to Mr. Dawes' call for help during the full moon. And that guy actually chose to consume the apprentice potion on the night of the full moon. In that case, it was highly likely that he would hear the illusory mumbles while the effects of the potion had yet to fade, and his spirituality was in a very unstable state. As such, he exploded with a bang. Fortunately, the horn of Icefligria that I heard back then wasn't lethal. Klein subconsciously sighed. Then, he thought of the oddity of the master key and vaguely came up with a hunch. The formation of the master key stems not only from the condensation of an apprentice's Beyonder characteristic, but also from Mr. Dawes' illusory ravings. Thus, the occasional problem of causing the holder to be lost becomes rather dangerous. It often allows the holder to enter inappropriate situations. This can be considered a kind of curse. And taking everything into consideration, Mr. Daw being the ancestor of the Abraham family, Bethel, is quite possible. Few Klein exhaled when he saw that there was no information about any hidden treasures. He took the brown notebook and left the basement. As he dropped his Zeitskoppe whistle, he retraced the same path he took to get there. When he reached the balcony, he raised his left hand and snapped his fingers. The scattered matches on the stairs lit up with a crimson light. They soon extinguished, leaving only minor burn marks. After taking a detour to Eastborough to get rid of his disguise, Klein returned to Minsk Street before midnight. He went above the grey fog and used spirit dowsing to confirm the authenticity of the 3 formulas. Soon after, he tried to conjure the fake world opposite him on the mottled long table. Klein was about to manipulate him when he suddenly raised his hand and smacked his forehead. I almost forgot. I brought the all-black eye back to the real world. After going through the trouble, he made the world appear in the majestic palace and changed the surroundings to look like that of an ordinary room. Then, he made the world pose piously as he said with a hoarse voice, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era. Please tell Miss Magician that I've already obtained the Trickmaster Potion formula. I hope that she can exchange it for items in the Sun Domain which are good at purification and exorcism. If the value isn't equal, then I'm willing to make up for it with additional gold pounds." After manipulating the world, Klein turned the scene into a ball of light and transmitted it to the Crimson Star representing the Magician. He clearly remembered that during the last time Miss Xio had found someone to purify and exorcise her, Miss Magician had also been present. Force flipped through the calendar on her desk and used a pen to mark the date of the upcoming full moon. She had decided that, as soon as she heard the horrible, illusory raving, she would chant the name of the fool and pass the painful minutes above the grey fog. Life is truly filled with things to look forward to. She closed the novel in her hands, ready to turn off the iron grill gas lamp that was set into the wall. At that moment, a flash appeared in front of Force's eyes. She saw the boundless grey fog and a lofty figure that resided in a majestic ancient palace, as well as a man who was praying devoutly. When the voice reached her ears, she almost jumped, feeling both alarmed and joyful. The Trickmaster formula that I've been arduously searching for all these years has been found just like that. I participated in so many different Beyond the gatherings and failed to find any clues to the Trickmaster formula, yet it has been found just like that. And not even a week has passed since I made the request. This is the Tarot Club as expected. It's not something ordinary Beyond the gatherings can compare with. Force sighed with emotion and endured her excitement and joy as she cautiously responded, "Mr. Fool, is that formula authentic?" Yes, the fool, who was sitting on a high-back chair and looking down, replied calmly. Force suddenly clenched her fist and secretly pumped it by her waist twice. Almost without any hesitation, she asked, "That was Mr. World, right? Please tell him that I will find what he needs as soon as possible." When the grey fog dissipated and everything was over, Force remained stunned for 2 seconds. She couldn't suppress her excitement as she stood up to pace back and forth in her room. The Sun's Domain, items that are good at purification and exorcism, I encountered them only twice in the past. But they were bought by others. They might not be willing to offer them again. Yes, back at Mr. A's gathering, Xio had hired a devotee of the eternal blazing sun to perform a purification and exorcism ritual. He's at least sequence 7, and he should have the relevant items. Or perhaps, he grasps key clues to them. I just wonder how much it'll cost. Although Mr. World promises to pay the difference, I might not be able to come up with the amount needed for the initial payment. Force's thoughts gradually shifted to her financial situation. She now had £370 in cash, mainly earned from what Viscount claimed had paid for the apothecary formula. She also had £510 in her bank account, which added up to nearly £900. As for something similar, it can go as high as £2,000, while the cheapest might cost from £500 to £600. Yet, it might not necessarily be the kind of item that Mr. World needs. What if I run into a suitable item but don't have enough money? Get a loan from the bank, or a loan from an usury with a higher interest rate. As long as all goes well, then when Mr. World pays the difference, my debt will easily be repaid. Maybe I could borrow from Miss Audie for a few days. She usually never cares about money, so she will definitely not collect any interest. Force quickly came up with a solution. Just then, Xio, who had gone to somewhere secluded at night to practice her combat skills, returned to their rented 2-bedroom apartment. Seeing that the lights were still on in her room, she knocked on the door and asked, "Are you pulling an all-nighter to write the beginning of your new book?" Force, you seem really happy. Did the publisher increase your rates? No. Force was slightly taken aback before she forced a smile. I just received a piece of information that's suspected to be a clue to the Trickmaster Potion formula. Really, your waiting has finally paid off. Xio totally didn't notice Force's hidden oddity. Seeing her good friend so happy for her, Force couldn't help but sigh to herself. I'm already a member of a secret organization. From that moment forth, I've taken on a fate that requires me to constantly hide and lie to my friends. Is this the price, one out of many to be paid? Saturday morning, Klein once again visited Inventor Leopard at St. George Burroughs Side Street. Since the bicycle had yet to be patented, he only paid the last £20 and exhorted Leopard not to rush to talk about subsequent investments and partnerships until he had the patent. With regards to this, Leopard was very agreeable. He had been tricked twice before for the same reason before getting a patent, once the potential investors who he had made contact with had fully understood his product. He was kicked aside to watch as the potential investor bribed the patent office and acquired the patent first. After leaving Leopard's place, Klein arrived at Isengard Stanton's place in Hillston Borough at the appointed time. It was a dark and gloomy house. Today was the day that the rewards for the serial murder were going to be dispersed. Walking through the living room and into the activity room, Klein saw the 2 detectives he was more familiar with, Castellana and Stewart, and sat down next to the latter. "Sherlock, how much do you think we'll get this time?" "It should be no less than protecting a doll." "Of course, I didn't do much, so what I can receive will be limited." Emperor Russell once said, the more ploughing and weeding, the better the crop. Stuart clenched his fist and held it to his bearded chin. Klein guessed with interest. The split might go as high as a few £100, and even the lowest wouldn't be less than £10. And I'm the one that will get the higher end of the split if Isengard Stanton's words were as credible as he had described, Klein added in his stirred heart. At that moment, a white-shirted, brown-vested Isengard, with white hair at his temples and a thinly contoured face, entered the activity room while carrying his signature pipe. As the fireplace burned, he sat down in a reclining chair and said with a smile, "Ladies and gentlemen, I just got back from the Backland police station. They acknowledged our contribution, and they think we've been instrumental in cracking the case. Although we didn't participate in the subsequent capture, we can still obtain half the bounty. In other words, we'll split £1,000 in cash. This is considered quite a handsome bounty, even in Backland. A single detective has to have zero expenses, not eating or drinking, and even resorting to sleeping on the streets for 4 or 5 years to amass this amount." The atmosphere in the living room immediately became relaxed. Everyone was filled with anticipation about the reward they would receive. Even Klein was no exception, as he guessed the amount Isengard would give him. "It should be at least £100, right?" he whispered silently. Isengard took a puff on his pipe, narrowed his eyes, and said in a satisfied tone, "Everyone, thank you for your trust in me. I will now do the splitting." The biggest contributor this time was Detective Sherlock Moriarty. The ideas and train of thoughts that he provided us had allowed us to find more clues and put us on the right track. He's a genuine expert at deduction. Ma'am Castellana can bear testament to this. I still have a few letters from Detective Moriarty, and anyone in doubt can take a look. That's very fair. He actually didn't list himself as the biggest contributor. Klein turned to the great detective, Isengard Stanton, and viewed him in a different light. It's no wonder that he has such authority in the detective circle. Seeing that there were no objections, Isengard nodded and said, "I declare that Detective Sherlock Moriarty will be awarded £300. Immediately, the detectives in the activity room broke out into whispers. From time to time they looked up at Klein, as if they finally recognized this brilliant detective whom Mr. Stanton had praised as an expert at deduction. What a generous man, a just man. Klein grinned and ultimately didn't act modestly. In second place were Isengard himself and Castellan, who each received £160, while the rest of the detectives split the remaining £380 depending on their respective contributions. Even the lowest received £15, equivalent to 3 or 4 weeks of their usual earnings. This was the benefit of handling a major case with a high bounty. Stuart, who had received £40, was very pleased because he felt that he had only done 2 days of observation. Furthermore, the subject he observed ended up not being the final confirmed suspect. Of course, he also had to pay a portion of the £40 all informants and helpers involved in the matter had to be paid. After distributing the bounty, Stuart suddenly remembered something. He took out a piece of paper from his pocket and said to Klein, "Sherlock, I've recently accepted a missing person assignment that pays a lot. Try using your resources and help me pay attention to it. If the person is found, I won't forget your share." "Sure, no problem," Klein replied indifferently. Stuart handed over the piece of paper and said, "It's this man. He's been missing for nearly 2 weeks. As he's involved in some improper conduct, or might even border on committing a crime, the client doesn't wish for us to seek the police's help." Klein nodded slightly and unfolded the paper. He saw a black and white photo that was made through lithography. It was a man with hair that was combed back in a slanted fashion, and there was a certain elegance in his propriety. He was about 27 or 28 years old. He had a handsome appearance, but there was an undisguised air of arrogance between his eyes. His nose was high, and his lips were thin. "Right, his name is," Stuart recalled and said, "Emlyn White." Emlyn White. Klein suddenly turned his head to look at Stuart. "Ah, isn't that the name of the vampire who's imprisoned in the basement by Father Udravsky?" In Duke Nagan's mansion, Audrey, who had been invited to a tea party, was listening to her mother and Duchess Della chatting about nobility matters with a slightly bored expression on her face. Her eyes swept across the 3-layered rack, the uniquely styled muffins, cake, and other delicious tidbits. She felt that she had been indulging herself recently, so she lightly picked up her cup and sipped the black tea. After a while, she got up apologetically and, accompanied by the maid, went to the bathroom. As soon as she came out, she met a tall, middle-aged woman with slender eyebrows and a graceful appearance. It was Duchess Della's younger sister, the wife of a hereditary viscount, Lady Norma. After exchanging the formalities, Norma looked at Audrey and said with a chuckle, "I heard that our beautiful young lady is very interested in mysticism." She mentioned mysticism. Could it be that someone from the psychology alchemists is here to test me? Audrey instantly entered her status of telepathist. A little embarrassed, she lowered her head and replied, "Yes." After hearing Audrey's affirmation, Lady Norma laughed. "What an honest child. I happen to know some experts in mysticism who are very knowledgeable. Would you like to chat with them?" "Definitely. That's exactly what I want." Praise the lady. Feigning surprise, Audrey drew a crimson moon on her chest. With a smile on her face, Madame Norma nodded slightly and said, "How about we have our afternoon tea together tomorrow?" "No problem." Audrey's excited eyes held a little innocence. After she bade Lady Norma farewell and headed for the living room, her smile gradually settled as her bearing turned composed and relaxed. The detailed changes in her body language, the colour of her emotions, and the changes in her body of heart and mind that were reflected superficially, they all implied that she holds no ill intentions. But she was rather nervous. It seems like Lady Norma might really be a member of the psychology alchemists whom she had been observing my expression and actions. But she couldn't adjust or hide her emotions. Maybe she's like Susie, a spectator, but unfortunately, she didn't know that the person in front of her is a telepathist, Audley thought, feeling both perturbed and proud. She couldn't help but let her feet gracefully walk in a straight line with one foot taking the place of the other. In the house of Isengard Stanton, situated in Hillston Borough. Klein's lips quivered a few times, but in the end, he didn't ask Stuart who his employer was or what he looked like. He decided not to get involved in matters involving Evelyn White as best as he could. Although based on Evelyn's words, he was a law-abiding vampire, but that was only limited to his claims. There were still too many gaps about his earlier life for Klein to be sure that he had not harmed the innocent. As a result, he lacked the motivation to seek out Father Yudravsky to save Evelyn. After all, Father Yudravsky was a Dawn Paladin who was skilled in combat and had the aid of mystical items. Furthermore, he was an unweakened Dawn Paladin. Besides, it would make it easy for him to expose his true identity to Father Yudravsky and Evelyn White. Let's hope that he can gain the approval of that powerful priest as soon as possible and finish the sentence to be let out on parole in his heart. Klein tapped 4 times in a clockwise fashion for Evelyn White. After the bounty was divided, the detectives took their leave, and Klein was given the best treatment. He was walked out the door by the great detective Isengard. Holding his pipe, Isengard coughed lightly and said, "There are still some suspicious points about the serial murder case that we haven't fully understood. There might be an even more ferocious guy hiding behind the killer's back. You must be careful not to spread the word that you played an important role in this case. It seems like the official Beyonders also suspect that the gigantic devil dog has an owner," Klein replied solemnly. "I know, I had my own guesses about this too. Mr. Stanton, you have to be careful as well. You were the one who gathered us, and you're a major partner of the police." Isengard put the pipe into his mouth, then he took it out and said, "Sherlock, I guess I'll call you Sherlock. You can rest assured that, although I'm no longer young, I'm still an outstanding fighter, an excellent marksman with an instinctive vigilance. Furthermore, you have a high probability of being a Beyonder not from the low sequences. I just wonder which pathway you belong to." Klein thought for a moment and said, "Mr. Stanton, you don't seem to be a native from Bagland. Your accent is closer to that of Civilaus." "Yes, just like your mid-seashore accent," Isengard admitted frankly. The two detectives smiled at each other as an acknowledgement of the other's observational ability. Klein returned to 15 Minch Street before nightfall. "Well, I now have £1,224 in notes, plus 5 gold coins, and a small amount of change. This is quite a considerable amount compared to how much I had when I first came to Bagland. However, Sequence 6 Beyonder ingredients will cost at least 1,500 a pop. Sometimes, because they're scarce and rare, the price might even increase severalfold. And Beyonders who can obtain such items usually aren't low in sequence. They wouldn't misjudge its value and sell it at a low price. It's quite impossible to pick it up at bargain prices. Although the lady with the artisan behind her is very eager for the Dark Emperor potion formulas, she has to consider the progress of her advancement. For her to only be at Sequence 9, it's quite impossible for her to spend a large amount of money to buy the formulas up to Sequence 6 in advance, unless she's filthy rich. Well, you can't always be so exploitative." While in thought, Klein was in no hurry to prepare dinner. Instead, he went back to his bedroom, drew the curtains, and went above the grey fog. He had an idea that he needed to verify. Sitting in the fool seat, he stretched out his hand and picked up the unadorned brass master key. Based on the notebook he read last night from an Abraham descendant, he guessed that the man had lost control on the spot because of his choice of advancing during the full moon. Therefore, the curse-like ability of the master key, which can make people go lost, only to find themselves in bad spots, has a high probability of being contaminated by Mr. Dore's illusory ravings. Other than the resentment and indignation in the Beyonder characteristic. "So what sort of changes will it undergo when the moon is full?" Klein mumbled. Conjuring a pen and paper, he wrote a divination statement he had thought long in advance, what it manifests during the full moon. Holding a piece of paper in one hand and the master key in the other, Klein leaned back in his chair, gave a self-deprecating laugh and said, "I'm courting death again. But there shouldn't be too much danger this time. Mr. Dore is far separated from the real world. He's lost in the depths of the darkness. Furthermore, I have the grey fog to shield me." In this case, the danger from divination was no different from direct divination. The experienced Klein half closed his eyes, and his pupils turning dark as he constantly chanted, what it manifests during the full moon. After 7 times, Klein fell into a dream. In that grey, detached, illusory world, he once again saw the basement where the Abraham descendant had died. The flesh and blood here had long since dried up. The silver pocket watch inlaid with diamonds and the ancient-looking master key had yet to be stolen. They were still lying on the ground. Suddenly, a sharp, hollow voice echoed in Klein's ears. It was like a thin needle stabbing into his head, extending inside, bit by bit, while it scraped as if it was going to completely peel off his scalp. This extreme pain caused Klein to wake up and sit up straight. He looked at the blue veins protruding on the back before they quickly restored to normal. It's much more manageable than spying on the eternal blazing sun or secretly listening to the true creator's angry roars. Klein went from pressing down his fingers to wrapping them as he thought. Of course, if this were the outside world, he believed that he absolutely wouldn't have had such a reaction. If Miss Magician had always been listening to such pleas, she would have long lost control from the looks of it. Due to the resulting curse, the master key makes the voice even clearer. That's not right. Father Utravsky has likely survived the night of the blood moon with the master key in hand. He clearly wasn't affected. Perhaps he had stored the master key in his bedroom and stayed in the hall outside for confession. As long as one makes contact with the master key, they will hear the pleas during the full moon. Phew. Before becoming a high-sequence beyonder. I wouldn't dare listen to it in the real world. What I heard just now seemed to be requesting assistance. In ancient Hermes, Klein carefully recalled and confirmed what he had heard. With regards to this, the only thing he could do was twitch the corner of his mouth. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. This is really a death-styled plea in the true meaning of the phrase. It's a pity. If only we could make those people from the Rose School of Thought hear Mr. Dawes' plea for help on the night of the full moon. With their already cold warped personalities, they would definitely explode one after the other. After carefully considering if there was any way to achieve this goal, Klein returned to the real world, and according to his plan, he enjoyed dinner, changed his clothes, and left the house. He made 2 transfers and arrived outside the Bravehearts bar. He only circled it once without ordering any alcohol before leaving. While doing so, he noticed that Kaspar's was back again. After walking a block, Klein specially got on a rental carriage and made the drive ahead to Chilwood Borough. An illusory figure appeared in front of him just as the horse moved forward. It was Miss Sharon, wearing a long black regal dress. "Are you done with your preparations?" Sharon asked coldly. The soft black cap on her head was firmly pressed against her light blonde hair. Coupled with her pale face, her exquisite facial features gave her the beauty of a doll. Klein answered frankly, "Not yet. I'm still waiting for an item." Sharon said with unperturbed blue eyes, "I've prepared a mystical item." "That's why you took the mission of being a 3-day bodyguard for £1,000? Back then, the item caught your eyes, but you lacked the money?" Klein smiled in enlightenment. "Don't be anxious. The more prepared we are, the greater the chance of success. Furthermore, I can usually use a mystical item from the Sun Domain to make up for my shortcomings," Klein added in his heart. Seeing that Sharon had stopped talking, he said, "I came here today to get you guys to help me in an experiment." "What is it?" Sharon asked simply. Klein said with a serious and trustworthy expression, "According to Marek's description, I think your curses are different. During the full moon, he has to endure the crazy desire for bloodlust which makes him unable to fight. As for you, you would enter a weakened state if you do not absorb the souls of humans. Is that right?" Sharon listened quietly and nodded. "Yes. I don't have any solution to your problem at the moment, but I think it's still possible to suppress Marek's problem temporarily. For example, taking appropriate medicine and letting him be in a state where he doesn't have any emotions. That way, during that time, he won't be in pain, and he will be able to participate in the battle." Klein expressed his thoughts. Sharon shook her head and said, "It doesn't work. Such medicine is no longer effective against him. No longer. In other words, it had worked before." Klein thoughtfully asked, "Why?" He had injected too much in the past. Even if he changed types, it will only be effective for the first 3 to 4 times. "We're unable to find any new type," Sharon said, suddenly turning silent, as though remembering something. Hearing her words, Klein immediately smiled. "I have a different kind of sedative here, from that apothecary." Seeing that Sharon didn't say that this sedative was ineffective, he clasped his hands and continued, "I'll give you one and let Marek try it during the full moon. It's going to be a full moon tomorrow night. If it's effective, let him drink 2 or even 3 in one go before the battle. As for whether he would develop a resistance to the same medicine in the future, that's not something that needs to be considered right now," Klein thought calmly. Sharon took the sedative that was stored in a glass tube, looked at the liquid that looked pure, and lightly nodded. "All right. As expected of someone who doesn't waste her breath," Klein smiled and said, "Miss Sharon, can you tell me the candidate locations for the battleground that you've decided on? I wish to familiarize myself with the surroundings in the next few days. This way, no matter where you ultimately choose, my preparations will be more than sufficient. And since they have the right to choose the location of the final battle, they won't worry about the possibility of me informing the authorities or any other beyonder who might try to take advantage of the situation, of course, if she really doesn't trust me. She could try another notarization," Klein thought quietly. Sharon stared at him for a few seconds with her blue eyes before saying, "Prepare a map of Backland when you're back. Leave it on the coffee table." "No problem. I hope that this cooperation will not only go smoothly but also be enjoyable." Klein habitually leaned forward to shake hands. Sharon lowered her head to take a look, and her figure gradually faded into the air. Klein continued his motion and raised his right hand to smooth his black hair, laughing dryly in the process. He had asked for the location of the battleground ahead of time, not only to prepare for the mission, but also to be on guard against Sharon and Marek. Although their philosophy was to suppress and restrain their desires, and it was unlikely they wouldn't kick someone to the curb when they'd outlived their usefulness. Klein couldn't be sure that Wraith Steve, Zombie Jason, and Werewolf Tyre didn't have what they had abnormally desired. If there really was a treasure that would cause any ordinary beyonder to have strong malicious intent, Klein really couldn't guarantee that the 2 mutants would be able to control themselves. Therefore, he had to figure out the environment in advance and prepare an escape route in the event that they wished to silence him. It wasn't that Klein didn't trust Sharon, who he had went through life and death with, but it was the most basic form of self-protection. One shouldn't have the heart to harm others, but one must be vigilant so as to not be harmed. Klein turned his head to look out the window and sighed inwardly in Chinese. One gas lamp after another kept being left behind as the carriage went forward. the streets became more spacious and cleaner, and it took him more than half an hour to get back to Minsk Street. It's really expensive taking a carriage at this time. Klein looked up at the nearly black sky and the red moon that seemed to barely pierce through the clouds. He walked on for a while, and suddenly he saw that the house of lawyer Judge N was dark. Pulling out his gold pocket watch, he pressed it open and glanced at it. With a chuckle, Klein detoured the Judge N's door and used the key that he had been given to open it. At that moment, Brody the black cat was already quietly sitting behind the door, staring at the visitor with his pair of dark, round green eyes. The room was dark and silent, bleak and lonely. Klein squatted down and tried to touch Brody's head, but Brody quickly moved back and flung his hand away in disgust. Shaking his head with laughter, he got up, opened the valve, and lit the gas lamp. Following Judge N's descriptions, he went to the cupboard to find the food that had already been prepared. Then, he went into the kitchen, lit the kettle to boil some water, and prepared Brody's favorite dish, boiled chicken breast. The black cat followed him in, and with an agile leap, it reached the counter. It sat beside him and watched him without making a fuss. Klein glanced at it, rehearsing the shredding of chicken breast in his mind while he chatted with Brody. You must miss Mrs. Doris, right? Are you worried about her condition? Lawyer Judge N didn't come home today. Are you feeling lonely and uncomfortable on your own? Do you feel like you lack a sense of belonging and are exhausted? As he spoke, Klein's voice slowly faded into silence. Brody the black cat remained sitting there, quietly watching him. It didn't make any noise, nor did it cry out. Audrey was invited to tea at Lady Norma's house. These are the mysticism experts that I mentioned. Lady Norma introduced the distinguished guests warmly. This is Mr. Hilbert Alucard, a psychologist and a jewelry designer. He's very talented. This is Mrs. Galantio Zileka. She's a doctor for mental health, what we usually call a psychiatrist. Hilbert Alucard was a man in his 40s. He looked to be of southern continent descent, and his skin was brown. His brown hair, blue eyes, and facial features were particularly outstanding. He gave off a silent and reserved feeling. Escalantio Zillica was a baby-faced lady who looked like a young girl studying at a public or grammar school even though she was already a psychiatrist. She was 3 or 4 centimeters shorter than Audrey, and she had long raven black hair that reached her waist and a pair of lake blue eyes. Audrey exchanged a few pleasantries with him, then she sat down, keenly aware that Alucard and Escalante were observing her. She didn't use her telepathist abilities, and she pretended to know nothing. While initiating topics in the field of mysticism, she constantly paid attention to her emotions, ensuring that they were in the most logical state. I can't let them find out that I'm already a Beyonder, and that I have already taken the spectator and telepathist potions. Audrey knew exactly what role she was to play today. And like the silent Alucard, Escalante was quite a conversationalist. After a few rounds of exchanges, she asked, "Do you know about major years and major months?" "No, I haven't heard of those," Audrey cautiously answered, using only the knowledge she had obtained from her interaction with mysticism enthusiasts. "In fact, I've already learned from Mr. Hanged Man what a major year and major month is," she added with a smile in her heart. A major year refers to the number of years it takes for the planet to deviate from its axis, totaling 25,920 years. In the field of mysticism, this is considered a complete cycle that goes from the beginning to the end. A major month refers to the number of years it takes for this deviation to pass through one of the 12 constellations. Each major month represents 2,160 years. During the transition of major months, terrible disasters will occur. And according to calculations, we aren't too many years away from the end of the current major moon. Escalante spoke with confidence, keeping the atmosphere harmonious. Audrey hid the fact that she knew a lot as she asked the wrong questions from time to time in a curious tone. With this, time passed quickly. At the end of tea time, Alucard and Escalante stood up at the same time to take their leave, leaving Lady Norma's house. This caused Audrey to be rather disappointed. She imagined that they would eventually hint at the matter regarding the psychology alchemists, but in the end, they didn't say anything. Yes, as a secret organization that cannot be exposed, the examination of candidates can't be that simple and direct from the looks of it. They will need to interact with me a few times and observe me in secret before they decide whether or not they want to reveal information to me and recruit me into the organization that's good too. I can report this to Mr. Fool. Audrey quickly understood the underlying reasons. She then took her leave, and Lady Norma walked her to the door, smiled, and said, "Audrey, I see that you're also interested in psychology. Why not consider being a psychiatrist before you get married? Count Hall and his wife are followers of the goddess. They should be able to support you in doing such things. Among aristocrats, unless there was a financial crisis or other special situations, coming to an agreement on marriage required a long process. Only after careful consideration and comparisons would they be able to make a decision. This was because this wasn't only a matter between two youngsters, but it also involved the alliance and mutual assistance of the two families. Therefore, although aristocratic women were able to officially enter social events under the direction of the Queen after the age of 18, proclaiming their adulthood and consideration for marriage, they often started a family after the age of 26 according to statistics. Similarly, the average age of a male aristocrat's entry into politics for the first time was 28.5 years. In other words, Audrey would have about 8 years to do what she liked after she reached adulthood. The Church of the Evernight Goddess had always encouraged female believers to go out to work and engage in certain occupations. In the aristocratic circles, many young ladies and women became literary critics, musicians, pianists, painters, etc. Is this a test? Audrey smiled faintly and replied, "I will need to read more books in that case." Actually, she had always felt that it wasn't too safe for the members of the psychology alchemists to become psychologists or psychiatrists because the upper echelons of the official organizations, such as the networks and the mandated punishers, likely knew of the acting method. Therefore, they would definitely pay more attention to this group of people. Lady Norma seemed pleased with her answer and nodded with a smile. Escalante and Alucard are both good teachers. Well, maybe I could consider asking Mrs. Escalante to be my home tutor on psychology. Audley nodded obediently. When Klein got up on the early Sunday morning, he found that the map of Backland on the coffee table in the living room had been circled in several places, and they weren't too far apart. Therefore, he spent the rest of the morning carefully familiarizing himself with the surroundings, figuring out exactly where the buildings were located and where the nearest cathedral was. In the afternoon, having time to spare again, he went to the Quadiag Club to practice his shooting and beyond the powers. As soon as he entered the hall, he saw the surgeon, Erances, hobbling out slowly from the buffet cafeteria with a crutch. After greeting him, he asked out of concern, "How have you been lately, Aaron? Has your luck improved?" Aaron, who was born with a blank face, smiled sincerely. "At least I'm not that unlucky anymore. I followed your suggestion, went to the cathedral, and told the bishop about the matter. He told me to go directly to the confessional to pray to the goddess. I actually fell asleep while praying, but I felt like the goddess had bestowed me with a peaceful state. After that, my luck has been normal. Praise the lady." He drew a crimson moon on his chest. "According to my experience, it was likely a particular Sequence 7 nightmare who caused you to fall into a deep sleep. Then, an Etork, who specializes in rituals, quickly set up an altar, prayed to the goddess, and neutralized your misfortune." Klein smiled. "That's great." At that moment, Aaron looked at him and said, "Sherlock, I've always felt that you weren't very pious in your belief of the god of steam and machinery. Why don't you change your faith? Look at me, a perfect example. Put your faith in the goddess. I'll earn it you making things difficult for me." Upon hearing Aaron's request, Klein almost drew the crimson moon on his chest, but he ultimately resisted the urge and replied very seriously, "Perhaps there's something about my behavior that has led you to misunderstand. But I have to tell you that faith is something that cannot be changed after it's decided upon." Aaron immediately raised his arms and made an apologetic gesture. "I'm sorry that I misunderstood your faithfulness. I shouldn't have taken your faith as a joke. All right, our differences in faith do not prevent us from becoming friends." Klein wiped away the fake expression he put on and smiled. "That's not true in Fisak and Fenapota. They can only accept one faith. In comparison, with so many churches coexisting for more than 1400 years, Lowen and Intis are much more open in this respect." Before Aaron could answer, he casually changed the subject. "Did you see Widow Septon again?" "I'm referring to the kid that had one of his legs amputated, the one who said that your luck would turn for the worse. He was certain that the Netorks would follow the clues provided by Aaron, so he wondered what the outcome was. He was curious if the child who changed Aaron's luck still had the tarot card in his possession." "No, I haven't seen him since he left the hospital." Aaron shook his head firmly. "What a pity. The Netorks can find his address according to the hospital's records, and it's not convenient for me to be involved, of course. The child might have moved away long ago." After a brief exchange with Aaron, Klein decided to head for the underground shooting range, familiarizing himself with his free revolver with ordinary bullets. At this moment, two more acquaintances came in. One was a member of the National Atmospheric Pollution Council, Coy and Company shareholder, Man Mary, and the other was Klein's landlord, Stellin Sammer. They were all wearing relatively light skirts, making them look much younger. According to the rules of the club, each member could only bring in one additional person. Therefore, Mary's maid and her bodyguard were left in the reception hall. Klein politely greeted them and praised them out of courtesy. "Ladies, you two are as beautiful as ever today, and yet there is a beauty that's different from your usual beauty." Having come into contact with a lot of important figures recently, Mary smiled and said, "Russell said that exercise is a necessity of life, and Stellin is always at home, dealing with trivial matters. Even when she's out, she would be participating in parties and listening to operas. Her health is much worse than it used to be, so I brought her here to play tennis and squash." With her high cheekbones, she looked around and saw a member of the House of Commons and two other members of Parliament of the Greater Backland area. She then turned to Stellin and said, "I see someone I know. Excuse me while I head over to greet them. You can wait for me at the library." All right. Compared to Mary, Stellin was clearly much prettier, but towards this lady, she seemed very respectful and docile. After Mary had gone some distance away, she slightly raised her chin, looked at Klein and asked, "Mr. Moriarty, you seem very busy these days." "Yes, I was working with a lot of detectives to help the police investigate the serial murder case. We made a certain contribution and received quite a sizable reward," Klein answered truthfully. Stellin covered her mouth with her hand. "Really? What did the murderer look like? Why did he kill those ladies? The newspapers have been very vague." "I'm sorry, I have to comply with the confidentiality clause." Klein deftly made up an excuse. "It's not like I can tell you that it had a body of black fur, a smooth, glistening tail, and that it likes to run on all fours." Klein lampooned inwardly. Stellin nodded regretfully, and then she asked curiously, "So how much did you get?" "It was split among quite a number of us." Klein didn't answer directly. "Was there £50?" Stellin pressed. "Yes." Klein nodded honestly. Stellin Sammer smiled. "You earn a lot more than I imagined." You really are a capable detective. No, it might take years to come across such a case. Klein smiled and shook his head. No matter what, you have proven your ability. Stellen's eyes looked like they were thinking as she said, next Sunday, Luke and I will be hosting a party at home. I hope you can come. Sorry. I was very presumptuous. I'll have my maid send the invitation to you. Hey, there will be a lot of unmarried ladies at the party, and their fathers or mothers will have decent jobs, and their families will earn more than £200 a year. Some of them have part-time jobs that they can do at home, such as being a typist. They're all very excellent women. This is a blind date party. Mrs. Stelling has approved of my ability to make money as a detective, so she plans on introducing me to a girl. But in her eyes, am I only fit to be with a woman at that level? Many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind, but after considering the need to maintain their neighborly friendliness and the trouble of preparing his own dinner, he agreed with a smile. If all goes well, I'll be there on time. Stelling smiled and said, then Luke and I will be awaiting your visit. She left without another word and entered the small library of the club, while Klein proceeded to practice his shooting and beyond the powers in the small, enclosed shooting range. At 9 o'clock at night, Klein was sitting at his desk, watching as the crimson moon gradually pierced through the clouds, revealing a full body. The water light red veil, slowly spread out, and time passed by the minute. When it was 10:15, he heard illusory pleas that seemed layered. Klein easily guessed that it was from Miss Magician. Closing the curtains, he switched off the lights, took 4 steps counterclockwise, and went above the grey mist. There, he reached out to touch the shrinking and expanding crimson star. In a split second, the hazy figure of Force appeared on the chair with the symbol of a layered door. She let out a sigh of relief, stood up, and bowed. Honorable Mr. Fool, you have saved me once again. That's not something to worry about, Klein replied in a very light, casual tone. Force was left speechless and sat down again. She was considering what had just happened, so she didn't say anything. As for Klein, he didn't take the initiative to bring up any subjects in order to maintain his image. Within the towering palace, which looked like a giant's residence, the silence quickly transformed into the main theme. When Force snapped back to her senses, she suddenly felt that this atmosphere was a little oppressive and uncomfortable. During the gathering, there's still Miss Justice, Mr. World, and company. There was no need to worry about complete silence, but now, there's only Mr. Fool and me. What should I do? This pressure is stifling. I need to say something, I have to. I can't just sit here like an idiot that's Mr. Fool. He certainly wouldn't care about anything, but I'm so nervous and restricted. Force suddenly felt as though she had found herself alone with her boss when she first entered the workforce. Although Clyde wasn't a spectator, he could clearly see Miss Magician's restraint and uneasiness. He smiled and said, maybe you can tell me how you became a Beyonder. For example, how you obtained the apprentice formula and that bracelet. Klein silently added the real question he was trying to get by. Force relaxed a little and recalled. That was almost 3 years ago. I just graduated from Backland Medical School. With my father's help, I entered a private clinic with pretty good benefits. Hey, my father had already settled down in East Berlin back then. Ever since the safe sea route to the southern continent was discovered, the outstanding youth of the kingdom started spreading their footprints to every corner of the land. My father, as a low-level military officer, went to East Berlin to chase after wealth and power. My mother and I were left behind in Backland to live like widows. Hey, it would take months before a distant letter sent by boat would arrive. This situation isn't uncommon in the kingdom. I knew an old gentleman who had 5 children, but they were either in the archipelago, Western Berlin, the Paz Valley, or the Hargante Plains. They have their own career, their own family, and their own wealth, but they've forgotten that there is a father waiting for their return all this time. When I was in grammar school, my mother fell seriously ill. I had no choice but to helplessly watch her die on the hospital bed, and it took my father a month to answer my letter, telling me that he had a new family and a new life in East Berlin. He gave me all his property in Backland plus some money. I think he felt a little guilty. As a best-selling novel writer, Force had mastered the art of rambling. Since Klein had nothing to do, he listened quietly without interrupting. Phew, Force exhaled and continued. Anyway, my father introduced me to Josefov Clinic through the Veterans Club. The salary there was really good, and I was doing pretty well, but I was a little anxious about the future. Hence, I worked hard to learn from the senior doctors and worked hard to save money until I met an old lady who came to see me regularly. She was very lonely and childless, and her partner had passed away 10 years ago. I had some sympathy for her, so I often talked to her and accompanied her. Once, I was surprised to find that she was able to walk through walls, which opened a whole new world to me. The old lady said that it was something her husband left her. She vaguely mentioned that as long as one wasn't a member of some family, there was apparently no curse. Not long after, she was so ill that she was on the verge of passing away. She asked me if I wanted to become someone like her. I was very young then, and I still had a lot of fantasies in my head. I agreed without any hesitation. She gave me the formula and told me to watch her body after she died and take away the glowing object that would suddenly appear. And this was the thing she left me which could be used as the main ingredient of a potion. Also, she gave me this bracelet, telling me not to use it unless I'm in absolute danger. She also told me not to pay too much attention to the ravings during the full moon. Unfortunately, I was ultimately unable to avoid danger. After using it once, the full moon's raving became worse. It seems like that was a widow of a particular Abraham. She had used her own experience to prove that the curse only existed in the bloodline. Klein nodded. Once you become a high sequence beyonder, the ravings wouldn't have much of an effect on you. I hope so. Although she didn't believe she could become a high sequence beyonder, she believed in Mr. Fool. It was Monday again, and as soon as Klein got up, he went downstairs and saw an open sheet of paper on the coffee table in the living room. Effective. That's good. Klein immediately let out a sigh of relief. At 15 minutes to 3 in the afternoon, he promptly went above the grey fog to prepare for the new Tarot Club gathering.